So my wife and I are heading up to Duluth right now in Minnesota, and we're in a traffic jam, and I figured I'd use this time to make a little video help you guys pass the GED.
In this video, I'm going to give you 2 big tips for each of the 4 GED sections. Now, I'm not interested in just giving you little tips that you can just toss a sign after the end of the video. No, I want to give you something in this video that you can actually use to make a difference in your GED studying and to ultimately get a better GED score and to get it faster.
The first tip is to know how to use your calculator and then use it as much as you can. Let me show you an example of why that's so important.
So let's say that I gave you a question like this: x squared minus 10x plus 16. And I told you to solve it. So in other words, I want you to tell me what x equals. How would you do it? Well, if you recognize that this is a quadratic equation, you'll know that you could solve it. You could try to solve it by factoring or with the quadratic formula. But as long as you know how to use your calculator, there's actually a faster way to do a question like this. And this is what I call the plug-in trick. And this is going to work because many questions on the GED test are multiple choice. So understand first that we set it equal to 0 here, and the first step, we want to get the x's by themselves on one side of the equation. So we can subtract 16, and whatever you do to one side, you always do to the other. So now let me rewrite this. So we would have x squared minus 10x, and what does that equal? Remember, it equals negative 16 now, because we had 0 minus 16, and that's how we get negative 16. So now all we have to do is we take each answer choice and we substitute it into the equation for x, and we see if we get negative 16. So for example, we can take 4, and everywhere we see an x, we're going to replace it with a 4. So in other words, here this is how we would rewrite it. So we would do 4, I'm going to draw parentheses around the 4. So we'd have 4 squared minus 10, and we're going to replace that x with a 4. Okay, and so what does this equal to? Well, you would simply do this in your calculator. So 4 squared, and I'm going to rewrite it down here. 4 squared gives us 16, and we have 10 times 4, which is 40, so we'd have 16 minus 40. And again, just use that calculator really quickly, and you'll find out that the answer is negative 24. Now, we want to get negative 16, so since we know that answer choice A is out. Okay, so A is out, and I cleared that work out of the way so that we can see more easily here. And now we're going to try 2. So again, we're just going to take 2, substitute it in for x. So let me speed up a little bit now. We'll go a little bit faster, because remember, all we're doing is we're just replacing the x's with 2's now, right? So we do 2 squared minus 10 times 2. And we want to figure out what this equals. And if it's equal to negative 16, that tells us that B is the correct answer. So we could just put this whole thing in the calculator, right? So 2 squared is 4 minus 10 times 2, which is 20. And that is equal to negative 16. All right, so because I was explaining how to do this, it took a little bit longer, but on your test, really, it's that simple. You can just take the answer choices here, plug them in for x, you can just mash some buttons, and really within a short period of time, you can figure out the right answer. So note that you can use your calculator for most of the tests. So the majority of the questions you can use your calculator. There's a few at the beginning that you can't, but you definitely want to make sure that you use that calculator as much as you can. Don't be afraid to use it, because you're going to get the right answer a lot faster, and it's going to be a lot easier for you. So note that the calculator that you can use, it's called the TI-30XS Multi-View Scientific Calculator, and you don't have to buy the calculator, but I do recommend it. The main thing that I really want to stress here is whether or not you buy the calculator, it's totally up to you, but you want to know how to use it before you get to your test. You don't want to be trying to figure out how to use it when you get into the test.
So the first tip for RLA has to do with reading comprehension. I'm about to show you a reading comprehension strategy that's proven to work and will definitely boost your score on not just RLA, but all the sections. But first, let me show you why this is so important in the first place. I've heard students say that the RLA test was actually mostly reading comprehension questions and not much grammar. Now, the tests are randomized, so keep in mind that that version might not be the same as the one that you're going to get.
I really want to stress here that reading comprehension is just so critical to mastering RLA, but also science and social studies are heavily reading comprehension based tests, and even the math, because you're going to get a lot of word problems on the math. So the better your reading comprehension skills are, and the faster you can understand what they're asking you to do in these word problems, the better you're going to do on the test. So let me introduce to you a reading comprehension strategy. This is called RAP paraphrasing, and this is not a strategy that I came up with. It's from Shoemaker, Denton, and Deschler, and it comes from research that they did, but I have taught this before to GED students who found this really helpful. And here are some of the benefits. The RAP reading comprehension strategy is going to boost your memory and recall, and it's going to help increase your attention span so you'll have better focus while you're reading. It's going to help you understand the text better, and it's also simple and efficient. It's easy to understand, and it's very practical. I've looked at a lot of other reading comprehension strategies to teach GED test takers, but a lot of them are just, I think, a little bit too complex and too hard to remember to do a lot of good. So this strategy, though, I find it's very simple and to the point. And research shows that Shoemaker and colleagues, when they did the research, they reported that students who were taught to use the RAP paraphrasing strategy, they actually increased their recall of text from 48% to 84%. So that's a big improvement there. The strategy works like this. You just have to remember the word RAP. And you want to remember when you're reading the passages on your test, you want to remember that R stands for read the paragraph. So simply, you're just going to read that paragraph. Then the A stands for ask, what's the main idea, and 2 supporting ideas. And the P is to put it in your own words. So what is the main idea? Well, simply put, the main idea is just the main or the biggest or the most important point that the author wants to convey. And it's typically going to be your first sentence, but it may also be the last. Sometimes the author will state it in the first sentence and then again in the last. Or in some cases, it might not be stated directly, but it will be something you have to infer. And you can look for repetition. The author sometimes will use repetition to help you understand what the main idea is. But an easy way to think about the main idea is to read a paragraph and then think, if I was going to give this paragraph a title or a headline, what would I title it, right? So let's say you read a paragraph and it's talking about a soccer game. You might title it something about the soccer game, right? Or the red team wins the soccer game, or whatever it happens to be. I just made that up off the top of my head. But the point is that just think about what title would you give the paragraph, and that's often a good way to really zero in on what the main idea is. Now, on the other hand, there's also supporting ideas. And the purpose of these supporting ideas is to support that main idea. Now, these are typically going to be facts, that could be data, or it could be examples. And lastly, let's talk about how to paraphrase. So like I already said, paraphrasing is just putting things into your own words. And you can also, if you're having trouble explaining something in your own words, you can also pretend that you're examining the plot, or I should say explaining the plot of a show or a movie. And by doing this, you think about that paragraph and just pretend you're explaining it to somebody else as if it's the plot of a TV show, right? Let's switch gears now and talk about social studies. Your first tip is to make sure you master fact versus opinion. So the key to remember for fact or opinion questions is that facts can be proven and opinions can't be proven. So opinions are somebody's feelings, and facts are things that we can check the record and see if they're true, right? So here's an example. Duluth is the best place in Minnesota to visit. Is that a fact or is that an opinion? Well, it's an opinion, and the reason is because it can't be proven that Duluth is the best place, right? Some people might think it's the best place, some people might hate it, some people might think it's a terrible place, some people might think it's okay, but the point here is that you can't prove or disprove it. It's just somebody's opinion, it's somebody's feeling about Duluth. Now, what about this? What if I say Duluth is the 4th most populated city in Minnesota? Is that a fact or is that an opinion? Well, this is a fact because we can actually check the data, we can check the record, and we can see that yes, Duluth is the 4th most populated city in Minnesota. So depending on where you're at with your GED studying, you might have thought that those were pretty simple examples. So I want to show you a little bit more difficult example here, and this is a real GED social studies practice question that was written by the GED testing service, and this is similar to what you can expect on the real test. So it says, in January 1991, President George H.W. Bush made a speech about Iraq's invasion of Kuwait. Which statement from President Bush's speech is an opinion? So A says, the United Nations, with the full support of the United States, has already tried to peacefully pressure Iraq out of Kuwait. B says, and our own economy is suffering. The effects of higher oil prices stemming from Saddam's aggression. C, economic sanctions are taking a toll, but they are still not forcing Saddam out of Kuwait. And then D, we have seen too often in this century how quickly any threat to one becomes a threat to all. So I'd like you to think about which answer choice here is the opinion. If you want, you can even pause the video. You can read this, take your time. But now let's go over this. So basically here, what we're looking for are things that we can prove, right? So in A, it says, has already tried to peacefully pressure Iraq out of Kuwait. So we could check the historical record and we can see that, yes, the UN and the US did try to do this, so that's a fact. B says, and our own economy is suffering. Then it goes on to say, the effects of higher oil prices stemming from Saddam's aggression. So at least according to question B, it's talking about the economy doing badly and oil prices are up because of Saddam's aggression. And so that's got that fact in here. So C says economic sanctions are taking a toll, but they're still not forcing Saddam out of Kuwait. So we could go and check the historical record and we can see that the sanctions were put on and the sanctions hurt Saddam, but they didn't force him out of Kuwait. So then we go down to D, and D says, we have seen too often in this century how quickly any threat to one becomes a threat to all. So D is the correct answer here. This is the opinion because there's no factual statement here. He's just saying that we've seen too often that any threat to one becomes a threat to all. So that's not a fact, right? And so we can read the answer rationale. You can pause this and read if you'd like to. But basically they say the statement does not provide any factual statements that we have seen how quickly a threat to one becomes a threat to all.
It's awesome here, but the heat's killer right now.
Speaking of the heat, temperature questions are really common on GED Science, and there's a super fast way that we can do temperature conversions that we can use to get them right. So let me show you how to do that now. So you might get a question on your test that looks something like this. It might ask you to convert 35 degrees Celsius into degrees Fahrenheit. And of course they're going to give you the formula. You won't have to remember it. And the formula is going to look basically the same as this. It might look a little different, but it's going to look basically just like this. And so what you would need to know if you're using the formula is you just take that 35 degrees Celsius and you're going to plug that in to the equation for TC, which stands for temperature Celsius. Then you just would do the math, you could put it in your calculator, and you can get the answer like that. But there's also a faster shortcut way to think about it here. Here's an easier way to think about it if you don't like using the formula, and it's just to multiply the temperature in degrees Celsius by 1.8, then add 32. So let me show you just using the shortcut here how you would do it. So we just take that temp in degrees Celsius, which is 35. So we take that temp and we multiply it by 1.8, and then we just add 32. And you just throw this in your calculator, and you'll get the answer, and the answer is 95 degrees Fahrenheit. So what about going from Fahrenheit to Celsius? Well, if you get a question like this, say convert 75 degrees Fahrenheit to degrees Celsius, they're also going to give you the formula to do that. And again, if you want to use the formula they give you, you're just going to take that 75 and you put it into the formula for TF, which stands for temperature Fahrenheit. You do the math and you'll get the answer if you put the numbers into your calculator the right way, of course, right? And again, with these formulas here, this is what I would expect the formula to look like. It might be a little bit different, like maybe they'll do this like T temperature degrees Celsius, temperature degrees Fahrenheit. What they could do, maybe they could take this 5/9 and they could put it in front of the parentheses instead of behind it. But I would expect that this is how it's going to be written on your test. But if there's a minor variation in the way they give you the formula, just know that it's the same exact idea. It just might be written slightly different. But again, just like with degrees Celsius to Fahrenheit, to go from Fahrenheit to Celsius, we can also use a shortcut method if you don't want the formula. So if you don't like using these kinds of formulas, just remember this. So go ahead and add this to your notes. So to go from Fahrenheit to Celsius fast, you take the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit and subtract 32, then divide by 1.8. So let me show you how easy this is going to be. So our temperature in Fahrenheit is 75, so we just subtract 32, okay? And that's going to give me 43. And then once we have the 43, we just divide that by 1.8. And so I put that in my calculator and we get about 23.89 degrees Fahrenheit.
So for math, you definitely want to build a foundation on the basics first before you start trying to do more advanced stuff. So for example, if you don't know how to do percents, you shouldn't be trying to do word problems with percents. You got to start with the basics, build up from there, because if you don't start by mastering the basics first, you're just going to end up with a bunch of gaps in your knowledge, like holes in Swiss cheese, and it's really going to hurt you later on, and it's going to affect the speed that you pass the GED.
Unfortunately, we had to leave Duluth before I could finish filming, and on the way home we got stuck driving in a severe thunderstorm and a tornado warning. There were 4 tornadoes in Minnesota and Wisconsin that day, but we did make it home safely. And a few days later I went out to see some nature in Wisconsin, and that's where I finished the video.
So here's a big tip for RLA. Don't read the full passages if you don't have to. So I recommend reading the questions and then just reading enough of the passage to answer that question. So try not to waste time reading stuff that you don't have to. And if you find yourself really pressed for time, then don't even read the passages. Just read the question and then skim to the part of the passage that talks about what you need to know to get the question right. So you can't always use that trick though, because some of the questions the test writer is designed so that you have to read the passage to answer those. Like for example, sequence of events questions where you have to select the correct order of events in a passage. Those are hard to beat without reading the passage, but more often than not, the trick will work, and especially if you're really pressed for time, then you'll want to use that trick a lot. I keep hearing like dog sounds and dog barking, so I'm not sure if it's timber wolves or if they're dogs. Also, these mosquitoes are some of the worst I've ever dealt with in my whole life, so I'm probably going to get out of here.
I don't think wolves usually bark the way dogs do, so I don't know if those were wolves or not, but this is northern Wisconsin, so there's a chance that there were wolves, and I wasn't going to take that chance, so I headed out. So your next big tip for social studies is to not waste your time memorizing dates, names, and places. On your test, you're going to get questions based on passages, charts, graphs, and graphics, and you're going to have to use your reading comprehension and problem-solving skills to get these questions right. So always make sure to use all of the information that they give you, especially when you have both passages and a graphic. Make sure that if you can't find the answer in the passage, that you check that graphic and vice versa. So that being said though, there are some topics that tend to come up on social studies more than others, and here were 3 topics, and unfortunately nobody can predict with 100% certainty what will show up on your test because the tests are randomized, and each test version may be different, but the U.S. Bill of Rights, the U.S. Constitution, and how a bill becomes a law are all big topics on social studies, so I would recommend going into your test at least being familiar with some of these topics. Now, there are other topics that it would be good to review for social studies, and I'll put a link to a video down below where I talk about those topics. Now, for social studies, you also want to remember the MEC, and that stands for Main Idea, the Evidence, and Conclusion. So always think about what's the main idea of what you're reading, and think about whenever the author makes a claim, always ask yourself if there's evidence for the claim. And the conclusion would just be think about how the author got that conclusion. And if you start thinking about the MEC while you're reading, you'll anticipate a lot of the questions that are going to come up. If I had to pick one topic for the entire GED test that it's the most important for you to know, I would say that it's this one right here, and that's mean, median, and mode. Now the reason I say that this is probably the most important topic that you can learn for the GED test is because it can show up on math, science, and or social studies. So you're probably going to come across mean, median, and mode at some point during your test taking. So let's go over an example here, and the example says find the mean, median, and mode for the following data set. Now this is a very basic case, and these numbers are very basic here because I just want you to get the main idea here. So the mean just means the average. So to find the mean, all we're going to do is we're going to take the average of the numbers here from our data set. And what that means is we're just going to add all of the numbers up, and we're going to divide by the total number of numbers in our data set. Okay? So remember, the first step to finding the mean, take all the numbers in the data set and add them up. And then we're going to divide by the total number of numbers. So let's count 1, 2, 3,
4, 5. So we're going to add these up and divide by 5. So what's 4 plus 2 plus 8 plus 1 plus 2? Well, in my calculator, I get 17. So we're going to do 17 divided by 5, and that gives me 3.4. So the mean is 3.4. So now what about the median? So a lot of people remember that the median is the middle number, and that's only half true. So first of all, this trick only applies when we're talking about a data set that has an odd number of numbers. So since this data set is 5 numbers, this trick is going to work. Alright, so the first step to finding the median, you can't just look at the middle number, because some people would look at this and just say, oh, 8's in the middle, so 8's the median, and that's completely wrong. And if you made that mistake, or if that's what you thought, don't feel bad, just know that that's incorrect, so this doesn't hold you back on the test. So the first step to finding the median is you want to make sure that you order the numbers from smallest to largest. So let's take this and we're going to rewrite all the numbers in this data set so that we put them in order from smallest to largest. So we would do 1, 2, 2, 4, and 8. So now that we have them in order from smallest to largest, we just look at the number in the middle, and so that's the median. So 2 is going to be our median, and if instead of having an odd number of numbers, if this had been an even number of numbers in the data set, there'd be an extra step here, and it's important to know how to do that. But I'm not going to show that here in this video because I do have another video that I'll link to down below. But the mode is rather simple. The mode is just the most occurring number in the data set. So 4 occurs once, 8 occurs once, and 1 occurs once, but we have 2's. We see that there's 2 2's in our data set, so 2 is the most occurring number, so 2 is our mode.